Good morning, everyone, or I should say good afternoon or evening, depending on where you're located. And thank you for joining us today. My name is Melissa, and as we wait for participants to join in, we'll cover a few housekeeping items that we'll also post in the chat. All of our participants are muted. The conversation is being recorded and will be available on the Engage to Excel website and via email to everybody who registered for the session. And we encourage questions, and you can enter those in the Q&A on the lower bottom of the screen. If we don't get to all the questions, we will respond to you directly via email if you do not send your question anonymously, because we can't connect it. But it looks like we have a great group started here. We'll give it one more minute, Darren and Andrea.
Sounds good.
All right.
Hey, Andrea, while we're waiting and everybody's getting on, when you think about like your very first job, your first paying job that you had, think way back, what was that?
I'll say W-2 job is what I'm assuming, because first paying job is babysitting. And I think we used to do those a lot younger than they do nowadays. Nobody required CPR certifications or anything. But my first paying job where I got a tax return was I was a gymnastics coach in 8th grade at our local Wilmington Island YMCA in Savannah, Georgia. So basically my family and work can attest, I've been telling people what to do for a really long time.
Nice.
What about you?
I've been cleaning up stuff for a really long time. So my first job was when I was 11 years old, also at the YMCA. At the end,
I know that.
they put a brand new YMCA in, and I was, I guess, a janitor. I'm not even sure I got any tax forms from. I did get checks. I made 50 cents an hour. I was so excited that I had a job making 50 cents an hour. And that was my first paying real job. I was on the schedule and everything.
That's
So
fun.
proud.
Nice. Good. Thanks for that little banter there. And I just learned something new I didn't know about either of you.
We both worked at the YMCA. That's
I
hilarious.
know, that is
It
funny.
is hilarious. All right, well, it looks like we've got a good group here. So I'm going to kick it off with a couple of introductions. I'm Melissa Munier. I lead the marketing team here at Engage to Excel, and I'll be the moderator, along with Kathleen Erdy. She'll be managing the event in the background for us. And then joining us today are our two guest speakers and our very own recruitment experts, Andrea Shepard and Darren Finley. Andrea oversees our global customer relationships and delivery teams to ensure long-term client satisfaction. And Darren leads our recruitment solutions division, as well as the business strategy. And he's what we'd like to call our resident labor market expert. I know those are big shoes to fill, Darren. Andrea and Darren, thank you both for joining us and diving into the evolving world of work and the dynamic labor market. I'll pause for a moment if there's anything you guys would like to say before I turn it over to you officially. No, you're good. All right. So I will turn the conversation over to Andrea and Darren, but I do want to kick it off with a big picture question. What are some of the significant trends that you're seeing in the labor market right now? And then I'm going to go.
Thanks, Melissa. And thanks everybody for joining. This is going to be maybe different from a webinar you've joined in the past. And I know Dr. Charles and I did one of these a couple of months ago, just a conversation around whatever topic that we have. And today's topic is obviously the labor market. And with Melissa's introduction, she says resident labor market expert. That may be a code word for nerd alert. I'm not really sure, but that is kind of my hobby for whatever it's worth. And I do follow it quite closely and try to just learn and predict what's going to happen all the time. We think back to 2020 when the COVID first hit, and man, it was just a disaster on the labor markets, right? And we're looking at the data and go, you know what? There's going to be a tsunami of hiring coming up. It's really going to be pent up demand, and it did happen, which we're pleasantly surprised that was our prediction and it did happen. So I'm kind of excited about that. But then you look at the last few years since then, and it really has been volatile. I was trying to think of an analogy to kind of think about what the labor market has done. And when you look at, post-COVID and then, what happened after COVID, it was like one of those old trains that you see. People are shoveling coal, you know, those steam trains, and the train's trying to get up the hill. And that's what was going on with almost every major indices right after COVID. Like unemployment went up, wages went up, you know, number of jobs went up, like a really steep mountain, quite honestly. And then after about a year and a half, 2 years, the mountain crested, and then the train starts coming down. So we're trying to like put on the brakes. All what's going on, and we saw that in hiring, we saw that in the number of jobs, we saw that in the wage growth and everything. So it's kind of coming down the hill to get to where we are today. And you look back the last 18 months or so, and it really has been like this train that struggled to go up the hill and then put on the brakes coming down the mountain. It's been going across the plains. Think about coming from west to east, you know, from the Rockies and on. And the labor market is kind of demonstrating that. So you look at all the major indices kind of across the board. You think about the number of open jobs peaked about 13 million, 12.6 million. I think that was in July of 22. And since then, it's dropped back to just under or right around the 7 million mark. You look at the quits rate, and the number of people that are quitting jobs really kind of averaged between 2 and 2.3% from 2015 all the way in really to 2020. And then came the Great Resignation. And the quit rate was just crazy. And it peaked out also somewhere around 23, November of 23 is when it dropped back below 2.2%. And it's around 2% today. So the quit rate is actually very low and almost back to 2015 numbers. So if it feels like it's really slow or there's just not a lot of jobs out there, it's not that there's a big difference in what it was historically, just not the last 4 years. So the labor market really has stabilized. And while it became the Great Resignation, you know, when those wages were going up, and those jobs were going up, and everything happened after COVID, has become the Great Stay. And we really have seen, you know, kind of the great, like the Great Stay, right, happened really along the way. Really since June of 2024, it has definitely, you know, mellowed out overall in the labor market. You also want to look at wages and what happened to wage growth. It peaked out in April of 2021. And when you look at it today, since October of 2022, it had come down to 6.2% month over month growth. And now it's averaging 4 to 5%. You see our labor market reports that come out. So wage growth has definitely stabilized as well. So you've got, you know, the wage growth stabilizing, low quits, low unemployment, lower inflation, and lower jobs that are opening. That just kind of equals flat across the board. And a lot of people just don't know what to do with that, you know, and a lot of recruiting companies don't know what to do with that, but it has been pretty flat kind of across the board. So when you think about what does that really mean, being flat kind of across the board, and you think about, are there any pockets that are out there that are changing overall? You look at IT, they really got slammed last year with a lot of layoffs. And a big question that we get too is government. What's going to happen with all the government layoffs, right? And you think, well, what is the percentage of the total workforce that the government is? And it's small overall. The labor force today, and depending on who you listen to and who you look at, is somewhere between 167 million and 170 million people in the U.S. labor force. And by the way, that's about a 12% growth in the last 10 years of the overall labor force. And so you think about, man, labor's tight. Jobs are tight. We've actually grown our labor force 12% since 2015. So pretty significant growth, you know, overall. But a lot of people are asking, what's going to happen with the federal jobs? And number one, I just got to say, I've got, you know, compassion and some empathy for those people that just got hired in those government jobs in the last, you know, 12 or 18 months. And that's the ones that are going out first on the probation, right? According to what you hear in the news. And then the second ones are the ones that got the early retirement offers back in February. And about 75,000 people took that offer of early retirement. When you think about that early retirement, those people don't actually hit the market from an unemployment standpoint until September, because that's when those payouts are going to be. So you're going to see that trickle in. So I don't expect any major spikes in unemployment because of that. Even if the government does achieve its overall target of a 10% reduction of their 2.3 million workers, right, that are classified as government workers, that's about 230,000 people. So it's not a significant amount of any individual, you know, month. It's kind of what we see in any individual month of new layoffs and things. So I think it's going to come sporadically. I think it's going to be uneven. I don't think you're going to see any huge spikes. You might see some spikes this month, just small ones, but overall, I think it's going to be, pretty much flattened out over the next several months. What you think, Andrea? Anything spark any ideas in your head or any concerns?
No, it's always fascinating. Like I enjoy hearing where it's going and what it's doing. And, when we think about labor market trends and labor market data, I always flip that over to the hiring manager as well. So it's, when we all this information and what's going on out there, how do we relate that back to companies that are hiring? How are they using this information and how are they using it to make their decisions each day? And it's one of those topics that I kind of get on a soapbox about. So I might steal your microphone here for a minute, but it's, all the labor market analytics is essential, not only for the hiring manager's personal experience, but also for the candidates and just kind of the overall process. And so having access to the data, you describe the big picture, but when we kind of boil it back down to individual jobs that are being hired for at a time, it is essential to set, realistic expectations from the start. So when you go to like the beginning of the process, once a hiring need is identified for a company, having a clear job description established, and that manager, typically has what we call like discovery or an intake call with the recruiter. And it's critical for the recruiter to come prepared with data and insights to inform and educate the hiring manager on these current market conditions and the trends. And, I love hearing what's happening across the country, but we also hear from companies like, make it personal for me, right? How does this affect my role or me here in this specific city in this location? And so during those meetings, the recruiter, they should be presenting data on availability of talent with that required skill set, education, experience, whatever that manager says they're desiring. And if that hiring manager has an extensive list of requirements, I think people used to call it a purple squirrel or a unicorn, or this robust, list of what they want in this role, it does create an opportunity for the recruiter to educate them on where they might need to be flexible. So if they have a laundry list of requirements and they can show them, hey, in your specific city that you want to hire this for, there's a very limited number. There's 5 people that exist with all these skills. And then it allows them to kind of have a discussion around shifting that criteria. You may take some of those skills and move them to be a little bit more flexible or aspirational, or letting somebody know that they could grow into those opportunities while they're working this job, and show that manager what it does to that skill set what it does to that pool of people and how it broadens it. And so they should also come into those conversations with competitor insights and just showing which organizations are also hiring for similar roles and what they're offering. And when you get to offering, people always, compensation is a big focus, and having that, critical component of the discussion. So if the recruiter is providing salary data for that role in that range, ensuring alignment to market expectations is important. So if the proposed compensation for that position is below the midpoint or just not competitive, it's important to discuss that in the very beginning. And so the hiring manager, first of all, they should always be able to articulate, why this role and their team or their company is a great place to work. Why should somebody want to join this organization? And especially if the comp data isn't in a solid range, what other things are they going to get from working here, and why would it attract somebody? But that, comp data also enables the hiring manager to take that back and collaborate within their organization, whether it's with comp or their boss or HR, to secure the budget adjustments if that's needed or possible. I also want to point out that a lot of the recruiters' analytics data can have, we've got great EEO data these days on insights into the diversity of the applicant pool. And if an organization has specific diversity goals, this data helps the hiring manager make an informed decision and just understand what the company's strategy is on the available talent pool. And just sharing all these insights at the start of the conversation of the hiring process is essential, because if the recruiter waits to provide this information until later, it can be perceived as an attempt to kind of ask the hiring manager to lower expectations. And it looks like the recruiter saying, oh, please make my job easier and drop your expectations, rather than a strategic data-driven approach. So just kind of setting those clear expectations from the beginning ensures a more efficient and informed hiring process. But overall, to answer your question, I think just all the labor market data, the big picture, what's happening, in the economy across the board, as well as the specific ones by job, just is critical to all aspects of the discussion.
It's interesting when you begin to have conversations with individual managers that are trying to hire someone. We always call them hiring managers, right? But managers that need to hire someone because they've got an opening either in a strategic role or a production role or a management role, whatever it is, they're thinking about, how can I fill this job today, right?
Yeah.
And the data that you're talking about really will help them get through that. But when you think about, strategically, right? And you get these challenges that are not just the one-time challenge, they're going to be challenges for the foreseeable future with the changing demographics, that we have. What can employers and managers do to kind of address these challenges to help them really attract and retain top talent when they're in a really competitive market like that? Is there anything they can do to help set themselves apart?
Well, I think it's always the million-dollar question, right? How can we get our ideal person to come work here? But it just is, it was mentioned earlier, just the empathy of starting to understand, what does that employee want? So obviously competitive salaries and benefits is a given. I think we see significant changes in benefit plans as benefit costs continue to go up. And, if you're at a company that has a great benefit offering, oh my goodness, spotlight that, because it is something that employees want. But it does go beyond that. Companies need to focus on how they're creating a positive and engaging work culture, offering opportunities not just for professional development, embracing flexible work arrangements where that's possible, and then just the overall company culture, because people do have high expectations, and it's continuing to grow on how are they giving them this work-life balance and this overall offering of where they choose to spend more time typically than they even spend with their families or at home. It's a big decision that they're making.
You mentioned the job seeker and job seeker preferences and things like that. So I want to pivot just a little bit and think about how job seekers are finding jobs today and how they might be using AI, as part of not only a recruiter's tools that we have, and I know other recruiters have them as well, right, to use to go help and find those right candidates. But how are you seeing the interaction between candidates and AI and recruiters and AI, and how that helps, solve some of these challenges, or maybe even make the challenges more difficult in the labor market we have today?
Yeah, it's kind of becoming one of my fast and favorite topics, but it is also kind of presenting a lot of a conundrum in the mix that I find it fascinating to see. And we've been trying a lot of unique tools on the recruiter side, right? So on the employer side of how we're hiring people to drive automation and optimization in the overall recruiting process. And if you look at the accessibility of technology and AI for the applicant too, you hear a lot of people talking about how they're moving towards this vicious cycle of, you've got AI doing the applying and AI doing the reviewing. So it's taking out, I think, the human element out of a lot of it. But a number of the tools out there that the job seekers are using, I have this one ad that keeps popping up on, it seems like every feed I'm on. It was like jobhire.ai, and it said, we would apply for 50 jobs a week for you that you're an ideal fit for, customize your offer letter, and it's going to send it as soon as the job is posted. So that I thought was really interesting, and it kind of immediately made me think about an article I'd read a year ago on LinkedIn. It was like Valentine's Day, February 14th last year, about what's happening in India. So it said last February that 88% of Indian professionals are seeking or open to a new career opportunity. And this means that, from a top of funnel, the number of applicants is overflowing with candidates. So employers are then having to use more technology to weed through these large applicant pools to determine who's truly qualified and actually interested in changing jobs at this time. And if our workforce, here in the US, starts passively applying or using some of these tools and automation, it requires minimal effort on their part to kind of fish for a new opportunity, we'll end up in the same place where you have thousands of applicants for a unique individual role. And I also look at how everyone is embracing, ChatGPT and Gemini and everything in our AI, our everyday use, because I am too. I love the accessibility of it. But I was talking to a friend of mine, and she's an oncologist here in Houston. And earlier this year, she was having to hire for a lab technician. So it's a pretty entry-level job. And she told me, she's like, she was so excited that week. She had 18 interviews set up. And I told her, I said, you should never interview 18 people in person for a job, especially if it's an entry-level job. She's like, oh, but all of their resumes were so great. And I told her, I said, because what the people are doing nowadays is they're uploading the job description and their resume and saying, customize my resume for this job. So on paper, they all look perfect. And so I did follow up with her afterwards, and I was like, how were your 18 interviews? And she said 17 of them were a disaster, but luckily she had one good one in the mix, but it was a significant waste of her time. So it is fascinating on, how AI can work and all the ways that we can use it, but it really is changing the way that we work and that we hire, and we're having to kind of weed through and find a whole new path forward with everybody having all the accessibility to all these tools.
Yeah, it almost that makes you think you have to get your recruiters trained on the technology, and it's just a whole nother level of technology. Everybody, took years to adopt LinkedIn or years to adopt, Indeed, or whatever you're using from a job board and technology standpoint. Well, now you got another layer of things you've got to do, because the recruiters have to be the ones, I think, in my mind, they got to go through and now vet these candidates still, even though the technology is helping out a little bit, right? And trying to drive some of that efficiency. It's just a really interesting take on what recruiters' roles are going to be as we go forward, not only using the technology, but still vetting and screening candidates like we've done for bazillion years that I've been doing recruiting, right? There's still value there, it sounds like. Would you think that?
And pretty much make a full circle, I think. So when you look ahead, what do you feel like the future of work looks like?
Well, I think there's a lot more technology in everybody's work. I think we are just on the tip of the iceberg, to use that analogy, around AI, and not just what it's going to do in recruiting, like you've just been talking about, well, what it's going to do to every aspect of the job, whether it's accounting and finance, whether it's marketing that we see it impacting as well. What's it going to do to production lines? What's it going to do to, and what I'm most excited about is like workforce planning. Typically, workforce planning has always been kind of the lagging technology that's been out there. We got great applicant tracking systems, but then we got great HRIS, and then we've got these tools that are coming together and becoming more integrated, and great outreach tools. But workforce planning has always been, I think, lagging, just because the amount of data that you have to really create a robust workforce planning algorithm and information that helps everyone really staff so much better than they had. So I think that's going to be the biggest piece that's going to impact the entire labor market, is better workforce planning kind of across the board. But I do think too, we're going to begin to see new jobs, especially in our sector, kind of come in. So whether it's a new kind of data scientist or a new kind of people scientist, really, that are going to be not just looking at the data, but now at the jobs and at the technology. You got to kind of put all those things together. And then you've got, I think, HR really is going to become much more of a people strategist, right? So many of the tactical pieces of HR, so whether it's benefits administration, whether it's the recruiting tactical pieces, whether it's the reviews and performance reviews that are coming in, that still need to have somebody having a conversation, right? You're also going to have a people strategist in HR that's going to be much more in tune to the workforce planning side, the technology side, and the needs of the organization, so that HR can really become much more focused on revenue generation. You look at every senior role across the organization, whether it's the CEO, CFO, they're all focused on revenue generation. And HR has traditionally been this cost center, right? That has been viewed on as an expense, as a cost. We've got to flip the script on that and help organizations understand that HR is not a cost center anymore. It's a revenue generation machine, because we're going to help with workforce planning. We're going to help with getting the right talent at the right place. And that's what I'm most excited about when I think about the future of what's going to happen in HR and recruiting, is that we really do help organizations become much more focused on what's going to drive value to the organization, what's going to drive value to the employee, and them getting a line of sight of their contributions to the organization overall and really kind of help driving that across the board.
Yeah, I think the other thing we have to think about, and we're seeing it, I think a lot, especially in the last several months, is, we've got so many employers. You mentioned, COVID and kind of how things changed this last 4 years, but employers requiring employees to return to the office. And that's a really big shift for people. And that's, I think, not just in the US, but a big global shift where employees are pushing back and they want that remote work and flexibility, and companies are trying to plan for the future. And when we look at, and they talk about, succession planning and growth, and do we have enough leadership within our position or potential leadership? And, a lot of that great mentorship, which benefits both parties, the mentee as well as the mentor, happens in a collaborative in-person environment. So a lot of that organic growth and engagement can happen in an office setting where people have gotten very used to the remote side. And I think some of that hybrid model and some flexibility on certain days of the week is going to come into play. And it's going to be interesting to see kind of if there is a greater emphasis on the remote work and flexible work arrangements that the employees are asking for, or I think that pandemic accelerated the trend, but it's likely here to stay, and we'll see how that all plays out in the near future.
It'll be a huge impact as it balances out, right? Just like the labor market's kind of balanced out, it'll also kind of balance out. I see Melissa's coming back on to give us the red flag warning. We got just a second. I want to say just before we wrap up, as I was doing the research and getting ready.
We have a question.
Okay, good. I'll answer that. Is that if you're a talent leader in an organization, whether you're in HR, whether you're in the C-suite or you're a manager, when you look at the challenges you're going to have going forward, there's 290,000 boomers retiring every year. It's about 10,000 a month that are going out of the workforce while the millennials are coming in. A lot of us are kind of jaded by what happened with the Great Resignation and the significant increase in wages and acceleration of wage growth across the board, where you had to offer somebody 10, 20, 30% more than you had budgeted, to bring someone on. With the stability of the wage growth, stability of the labor market, stability of the unemployment rate, now is probably the best time that there's been in the last 5 years to think about strategic top grading of your senior talent that you're going to be losing with the boomers retiring. So be thinking about how can you go back and be a great talent advisor to your organization and begin thinking about, if you don't have a good succession plan in place for your senior leaders, how do you help get that going? Because now's the right time in the labor market to do that. So that's
a great point.
Mission to everyone.
All right, so we do have one question. What are some of the ATSs that use AI to make the process of applying more streamlined for the candidate, removing the hurdles, or can prioritize candidates based on quantitative data, so years of experience, certifications, etc.?
I'm going to let Andrea answer. I'm going to put you on the spot, let her answer. She is way closer to actual ATSs than I am, but I'll give it a shot, Andrea, if you want me to. I'd much rather you answer it, though.
Yeah, and I think one of the big things that changed with ATSs over the last, I would say, 10 years is that we went from these highly customized, like back in the day, Taleo had every customization and everybody's was their own unique version. And then the ATS itself, whether it's, Workday or SuccessFactors or iCIMS or whatever, they became very off the shelf. So it was part of a bigger HRIS package. And it was a little bit of recruitment got downgraded in a lot of ways because you just got this cookie cutter. So what you're seeing is a lot more, I would say, like bolt-ons. That's why, if you went to HR Tech, you could see rows and rows and rows of companies who have got all new technology that they say we fully integrate with all the major players. So it's not that the current ATSs or the big ones don't have a use for AI in their process, but most of them haven't elevated it to the level of kind of some of these smaller companies and offerings, and they seamlessly integrate with the ATS and can do, practically anything, right? So you've got a lot of the ones where it's, offering screening and offering, automated interviews with an AI tool, or the ability to have, do resume review without making decisions for you, but to call out certain things and maybe stack rank the candidates. There's a lot of different tools out there. And honestly, the list would be a mile long of which ones have those offerings. But if we, oh, it is Edward, I can see the name now, but I'm happy to have a sidebar conversation and list out some of those for you if you're looking for some specifics to level into your current process.
Awesome.
Great. Well, Andrea, Darren, I want to thank you for taking the time out. I'm sure we will do another session like this. I appreciate your time. I appreciate everybody here joining us. And as a reminder, we have this recorded. We'll be sending it out probably within the next 24 hours. So with that, I wish everybody a great rest of their week.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.